welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, Elon Musk says he is pulling back significantly from his work with the US government, notably from his role as the head of the Department of Government Efficiency. And top US officials pull out of a Ukraine peace meeting in London at the last minute. We ask why. Hello and welcome to the program. We begin in the United States, where billionaire Elon Musk is saying that he's going to be cutting back on the time he spends in his role with the Trump administration. Well, he currently heads up the Department of Government Efficiency. Well, one of President Trump's closest advisors, Elon Musk, has spearheaded the so-called DOGE, which says it aims to fight fraud and identify waste in the federal government. Well, his decisions, though, have not always been well received, especially when it comes to cutting hundreds of federal jobs. Well, as protests against Musk and his companies have gathered steam, his political involvement has led to weak relations with Tesla investors and owners, directly causing a sharp drop in profits. Well, President Trump's tariffs and trade wars have added to Tesla's weakening position in the market. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Republican strategist and political commentator Scottie Nell Hughes, who joins us as ever from Nashville, Tennessee. Scottie, great to see you. We hear from Elon Musk. He's going to be pulling back, he says, significantly from his work with the US government. That doesn't come as a massive surprise, does it?
No, and while some might say it's because of the fall of Tesla stock in the first quarter and purchases, as well as the political pressure and everything going on with the protests, they would say that is the reason why he is stepping back for the betterment of his own wealth. But Elon Musk is still the most wealthy man in the country, with more than $330 billion sitting in his bank account. And this choice to step back from DOGE is not necessarily one that he's making. It's not a choice. He has to do this as required by law. He is a special government employee, which means only 130 days he can serve in this White House without having to disclose a lot of private details that he obviously is not very comfortable in doing at this stage.
Do you think he will, though, after that 130 days is over, continue somehow or other to play a part in the administration, advising the president, for example?
Well, Elon Musk is not going away, but I think in an official capacity, he has to do this. And while it is 130 days, that's within a 365-day period. So him officially being on the clock, he is going to have to step back. Now, here's where the ethics are going to be questioned, because obviously Elon Musk has several enemies, both within the administration, has ruffled some feathers in Congress. So he is going to have to make sure that his T's are crossed, his I's are dotted. And when they have these discussions that involve business-related matters, he's going to have to make sure they're on a casual and that no one can look at him and say, you're actually conducting official business, therefore breaking the rule, breaking the law, and thus facing prosecution, which obviously we know that the Congress and the Democrats are more than willing to bring against him.
Okay, so when he says he's more or less done with his role of basically bringing about efficiency, he says mostly done with that establishment of the Department of Government Efficiency. I mean, what's he done, in your opinion? What can he put to his name by way of achievements?
Well, if you are a conservative, if you're a Republican, and even if you're an independent, you're looking at several of the cuts. Obviously, he did downsize the size of the U.S. government, the bureaucracy. And while, yes, it did result in good people possibly losing their jobs, there's also a lot of waste that was cut. And so he can tout that and saying that there was obviously a lot of government waste that had been going on underneath the Biden administration. So I think that was his number one job, his number one role. And Republicans, considering he has one of the highest ratings amongst his own Republican base, approval ratings, even probably higher than Donald Trump at this stage, think that he's done a great job at that. So he can tout that, and he's done his job and back off. But like I said, I don't think you're going to see Elon Musk off the invitation list anytime soon at the White House. I think he'll still be making multiple appearances whenever he so feels like. I think he has an open door policy.
Sure, well, it looks like they've remained friends, which is a good thing, given that they're two kind of larger-than-life characters and personalities. I mean, he says he's got the government's financial house in order. I mean, how out of order was it to begin with, do you think, Scottie?
I think it was extremely out of order, but I think it's a little pretentious to say that Elon Musk has gotten the U.S. government's financial means and their books balanced. I think anybody can look at what's going on right now, trade-wise, as well as the American economy. I mean, just go to the local grocery store and you can say that our house is still definitely in chaos when it comes to our economy. But I do think he has taken great steps in doing exactly what he was set out to do, which was to minimize, to downsize the size of the federal government, which had become very bloated under the Biden administration. So I think he can say success in that, giving him full credit for restoring the American economy. I think we still have a lot of steps to go to be able to claim that achievement.
Yeah, I mean, originally he talked about savings to the tune of $2 trillion US. That's on a federal budget of $7 trillion. I mean, has he got close to that, really?
Well, I don't know even if he has, you can't look at this budget when we look at our military and our Department of Defense, and you have Pete Hegseth out there bragging that he has the largest Department of Defense budget ever being approved by Congress, and say, well, fine, you might be able to save $1 trillion or $2 trillion. And that resulted in a lot of good people losing their jobs and joining the unemployment lines, but don't turn around and spend it in another department. And I think that's what the American people are going to be watching. If we supposedly save $2 trillion, then we need to see that clock starting to roll backwards. And yet the debt clock with the United States still continues to grow, and it will grow even more as this next budget continues to be put together, especially when you have a Department of Defense bragging about spending the most they ever have on our military.
I'm detecting from you, Scottie, something I don't usually detect, which is mild disapproval, perhaps, at something that's been happening there in the Trump administration these last 94 days or so. Am I onto something?
It's amazing how our conversations have become such friends. You can see it. I'm a simple reflection, I think, of what the grassroots of those that were supporters of Donald Trump that went to November and elected him to do. They elected him to cut spending across all fingers of government. And they also elected him to put America first, both domestically and in international policy. And it does us no good when we are sitting there and talking about our Department of Defense growing their budget, becoming more entwined in foreign conflicts, when we voted him to actually bring it back home and to focus on America. So yes, I think there is a growing anger happening within the grassroots that if Donald Trump does not watch who he's being advised by, will continue to grow and fester and will result in the midterms being lost by the Republicans. And then you can just go on and count Donald Trump having to deal with impeachment hearings like he had to do the first term, unless he begins to really fulfill some of those campaign promises, especially internationally, that he made back in November that got him elected initially.
Yeah, sort of a general sense of impatience. Does that sum it up?
I mean, it's a little over 100 days. So, I mean, we are realistic. It takes a lot to go back for what the 4 days are. However, the problem is we're not seeing steps in the right direction of it. When you're seeing, more and more involvement in foreign issues, when you've seen this trade war that's escalated with China, those are not steps to peace. Those are steps to actually continuing, if not escalating, the fight between the United States and some of the other countries that we should not be fighting with. So I think that Trump is getting some very interesting, and if I can honestly say, bad advice from those around him in some areas, that he is starting to diverse from, he's starting to go away from what his initial campaign promises were on the trail.
Yeah, and all the while we got JP Morgan saying that they do now expect a US recession. I mean, if the economy really starts to feel the heat more than it has done already these last few weeks, I know it's not a very long period of time to measure the economy by, but if by the end of the year the US economy is in recession, I mean, do you think that's really going to turn the temperature up on this administration?
I'm not so quick to say that a recession is going to, I think people expected a recession. There was going to have to be some sort of jolt to the American economy because it had become so falsely propped up by the printing of dollar bills by the last administration. So I think most Americans were prepared for it. The problem is we want to make sure that it's a short-term recession, that there are actual steps being put into place to bring us back and bring us back stronger. I don't know while there might be definitely some issues with our trade around the world, I think a lot of the American workers were very happy with Trump's initial shutdown and this fair policy of whatever tariffs you put on us, we will put on you. I think Americans were happy with it. Now, those investors probably weren't. But I think Americans were thrilled at the thought of bringing those warehouses and bringing those manufacturing jobs back to the United States. So Trump's reversal on that has made us kind of scratch and pause. and wonder if his economic policies are really well thought out with the American people in mind and not necessarily the billionaires that seem to be constant visitors in the Oval Office these days.
Just pivoting back to Elon Musk, I mean, how would you describe his operating style? I mean, have you got a couple of words that would sort of sum it up for us?
Eccentric, not traditional, not exactly what you would see the traditional CEO would be. But that's how Donald Trump was. And that's why I think Donald Trump does respect those that have been very successful in business. That's why he put Bissett in as Secretary of Treasury. That's why you have Witkoff leading a lot of his negotiations with foreign. And I think that is a good thing. I am 100% behind people who have a proven track record in business coming in and trying to apply some of those same characteristics to politics. I think that's why Elon Musk has been. So the other thing that Elon Musk is beneficial for, because he does have billions in his bank account, is he doesn't owe anybody anything. He can't be bought because nobody can afford him. And so because of that, a lot of his decisions are being made, the American people would hope, for the American people and not based on a lot of the special interests that continue to control D.C.
Right. So basically, we've got an administration here with an original approach to some old, sometimes decades-old problems, which may yield fruit. Is that basically what you're saying? That they'll bring something fresh to the table, bring some new ideas?
We needed fresh. We did not need tradition, because tradition was not working in the United States. And I think that's why the American people were so quick to be excited to see someone like Elon Musk, with hopes that that was restoring the American dream, that we too might be able to create something in our garage that one day might make us billionaires as well.
I mean, there has been talk, some of it's been dismissed pretty quickly by people quoting the Constitution at us, but there has been talk of Elon Musk one day, somehow or other, finding his way into the top job in the United States. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think that's exactly his goal. I don't think that's exactly what he wants. I don't think he would want the limits that being president of the United States puts on him. I do think there are others, though, that I think he likes being, I don't want to say someone who pulls the strings, but I think he likes someone that gets to be the advisor that can come and go as he please. Hence why he is saying that he's stepping down and stepping back from DOGE. He is wanting to obey the law. He does not want to become a government employee. So while some might speculate it, I don't think that's in his future, but I do think that this is not going to be the only president that he gets the annual invitation to the dinners with.
Has there been a single star performer, someone that stood out for you these last nearly 100 days, someone you perhaps didn't expect very much from, but who has over-delivered in your view?
That's an interesting one. Listen, you and I are on TV. You obviously sit in the anchor desk. It's real interesting to see people who sit in the anchor desk all of a sudden become in charge of policy. And yet they do more. A lot of people are complaining that they do more interviews on television than they necessarily do actually in creating policy themselves behind the scenes. I think there's actually some credibility to those complaints they have, but what else do you expect when you take a bunch of news anchors and make them secretaries of the various departments? That being said, I think that a lot of folks right now are very happy with J.D. Vance. I think that he's getting definitely some accolades. And I think that the border czar, the person, Homan, who is in charge of, I think people are very, very happy, despite all of the controversy happening right now with the possible deportation of a gang member to a foreign country. I think people are very, very happy in seeing what is happening with our immigration. The only thing that needs to be countered with is we need to have a very legal way for people, an easier way for people to actually become citizens of the United States. That's the next part that needs to fall into place.
All right, we're going to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure talking to you, Republican strategist and political commentator Scottie Nell Hughes. Thanks for your time. Well, for more, I'm joined now from Florida by Sam Nunberg, a former political consultant to President Trump. Thank you so much for being with us once again, Sam, here on Al Arabiya News. So we've heard Elon Musk saying he's pulling back significantly from his work in the US government. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I don't know if that was necessarily the plan to begin with. I think in a perfect world, Elon probably would like to have stayed longer, but it seems to me that it's just unsustainable for him. from a business point of view. As you look at where the Tesla brand is today, I would tell you that in the United States, there seem to be concerted efforts to have protest actually at these Tesla parking lots, at Tesla sales centers. You even had the former vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, being excited, saying publicly, it's great that Tesla stock is going down. With that said, let's also remember very quickly that you're looking at somebody who had the most prolific financial, and I would also say social impact of any activist in an election, at least in modern history. It's not only the $300 million plus, Tom, that he spent on this election of his own personal money, but let's be honest, it's buying of formerly Twitter, now X, and making sure that not only the algorithms, but that the news and the First Amendment, in my view, was protected during the last election cycle, as opposed to 2020.
Right. Well, you made it sound like the backlash against Elon Musk and Tesla was pretty significant. So perhaps that goes some way towards explaining the 71% drop in first quarter profits. Do you think he's going to perhaps focus all his efforts now on sort of trying to recoup some of that lost money, do you think?
Well, first of all, I have no idea. I'm not in his inner circle. I've been in the room with the man once or twice. So in terms of what his personal plans are, I just want to be clear. And he's very litigious. I don't know what those plans are. But what I would say is that history speaks for itself. And the more that Elon Musk is involved with Tesla, the more it succeeds. But let's also talk about another issue here. The issue is, what's his ongoing relationship going to be with the White House? Donald Trump cannot afford to have Elon Musk as an enemy. Donald Trump cannot afford to have Elon Musk on the outs, and Donald Trump cannot afford to have Elon Musk feeling as if he does not have any further input. So Elon Musk will be around politically. I think that you're going to see him when it gets to the midterms. I'm sure he will financially be supporting the Republican Party. I don't know how active he'll be campaigning this time, but
just reading between the lines, Sam, I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, tariffs have obviously been a thorn in the side of Tesla. So conversely, Elon Musk has lost out to a key plank of Trump's fiscal policy. Do you think too much is being made, though, of differences between the two men, or would you say that by and large they've got along pretty well?
Well, it remains to be seen how long Elon Musk will not hold Trump accountable for the amazing, this disruptive activity in terms of these across the board tariffs, and in terms of the supply lines that Tesla needs, which is the #1 American car manufacturer. And in fact, all public studies say that it has the most American produced parts. So it remains to be seen how long he would be willing to take that. And I think that it's in no small feat that Donald Trump has seemed to, is changing course here and taking a less hostile approach. It would not only be because of Elon Musk. Very quickly, Tom, give you 2 seconds. Remember, Donald Trump only had 90 days before the United States Senate was going to get involved in these tariffs. Donald Trump cannot afford for the markets to continue to fall. He can't afford for the Treasury interest rates on the United States Treasuries to continue to go up. So while Trump took extremely, I would say it wasn't exactly smart what he did on quote unquote Liberation Day, I think Elon Musk played a very important role in changing the course there as well.
I mean, is there a concern, do you think, in the US that the economy is sort of really going in the wrong direction? One poll I saw, by the way, said 37% of respondents in a major Ipsos poll approve of President Trump's handling of the economy. That's not a very high percentage, is it?
No, there certainly is a major concern. There's a concern among the Republican Party as well. There's a concern when I talk to politicians that are running for re-election or United States House members. Yes, this is a problem. Donald Trump's winning issue right now, and why he continues to focus on deportation is immigration. The economy itself, while inflation is no longer the issue. The issue is consumer sentiment. The issue is the markets. So we're going to see what the tax bill he's going to be able to pass will do, and also how the negotiations go with China. But yeah, I can't put lipstick on a pig here. The economy is a major issue, and that's why it's been a drag on his presidential approval rating so early.
Just going back to Elon Musk and his role in the government, I mean, how do you think history is going to look back on these, whatever it turns out to be 130 days in total, because that's the maximum he can do, although it's been considerably less than that. How do you think history will look back on his tenure as DOGE manager-in-chief?
I would hope that history looks back on it fondly from a substantive point of view. The cuts that he did, educating the public on what was going on behind the scenes and how dysfunctional even the operations of the United States government financially were, and then quote unquote, if not corruption, we would see failings. So I would hope there. And what I would also say too is you have to look at the Democrats wanted to launch protests in the beginning. You had House members even going in front of USAID, and they don't talk about that issue. They're now focusing, they're going to focus more on the economy as we go forward, and they're focusing on certain deportation issues, which I would say is a political mistake on their part, but it's neither here nor there. So and in general, it's a longer discussion, but it remains to be seen who the historian is that is writing. I would also say that we should also look at Elon Musk had to know going in that this was not going to be good for his finances, as we talked about earlier in the interview, and for Tesla's brand itself. So we will see. But those cuts are cuts that would not have been made without Elon Musk, and the public now knows about how dysfunctional certain things were going on. So I think that overall, besides the amount of money he spent, being the most prolific donor of all time in the last election cycle, look what he's done here too. He's walked the walk.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, unfortunately. Sam Nunberg, we really appreciate you speaking to us here on Al Arabiya News.
Thank you, Tom.
Moving on now, we're going to take a look at the Ukraine peace talks in London, from which top US officials have now pulled out at the very last minute. Well, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will no longer be attending that meeting with top officials from the UK, France and Germany. Instead, President Trump's Ukraine envoy, Keith Kellogg, is going to attend. Well, this comes amidst growing speculation over Russia's willingness to halt the conflict in return for concessions. Well, that includes the recognition of Crimea. Well, speaking to reporters at a news conference yesterday, this is what President Zelensky had to say about his expectations from the London talks and on the subject of Crimea's territorial integrity.
Our delegation has a mandate tomorrow discussing an unconditional ceasefire or a partial ceasefire. We are ready for this stage. We are also ready to state that after the ceasefire, we are ready to sit down in any format. If the Russians are ready for a complete ceasefire, then after a complete ceasefire with an understanding of how long it will last, we are ready for any format of negotiations with them, any format. I think America is a real leader. We want them to participate. We want them to put pressure on Russia. Ukraine does not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. There's nothing to talk about. This is beyond our constitution. It's our territory, the territory of the people of Ukraine.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now from Washington by Matt Terrill, the former Chief of Staff of Marco Rubio. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again, Matt. Just want to get your take on this. You've got Kyiv's allies, Ukraine's allies, gathering in London. At the last minute, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says he's not coming. Why do you think that is?
Well, I'll let the administration and Secretary Rubio speak for himself, but it appears that there's some logistical items at play there in terms of logistics of that travel. It sounds as if the administration isn't sending personnel there to be a part of those meetings. But look, at the end of the day, I think it's important to note what Secretary Rubio did say, and that was on the tarmac not too long ago. His comments and his thoughts on what's taking place between Ukraine and Russia and what's needed, frankly, to end this war. And the big elements of that being to get this war to an end is not going to happen through a military solution. In his mind, the administration's mind, there is no military solution to end this war. It comes through diplomacy. And right now, it's what the administration is trying to do, end this war through negotiation, through diplomacy.
Yeah, I mean, the talks between the US, Ukraine, European powers have now been downgraded there in London. I don't know if that's significant, but it seems like, there are some major differences of opinion, and the Europeans have started showing that they've got some red lines in all of this. I mean, do you think that's the real issue here?
Well, I think it comes down to Russia, Ukraine feeling good about this deal and agreeing to the deal. I mean, look, at the end of the day, this comes down to just getting this war to come to an end. And that's something that President Trump campaigned on doing. It's something that he's trying to do now as president. And at least from the administration's perspective, the notion here, I think that's important to recognize. I think Secretary Rubio touched on this, and others in the administration, I think, feel this way certainly. And that is, it's just a matter of days now in terms of figuring out whether or not this war will truly come to an end through a negotiated way, not necessarily a matter of weeks and months. And I think that that's how this administration feels about this right now. It is, look, there's a moment to get this to come to an end. Let's see where Ukraine comes in at play here in terms of these discussions. Obviously, there's been discussions around land, other elements at play here. You're seeing security guarantee discussions take form here. It comes down to, can this really come to an end through a negotiated way? The administration has been clear they've done everything that they feel they can at this stage to try and get this to come to an end in a negotiated way. I think we have to just wait and see what happens here through these final discussions, final elements of this. But look, the reality is it's not going to be a military end of this war. The administration has been clear about that. It comes down to negotiation.
So when it comes to these threats of taking a pass, as President Trump put it, or not attending the conference in London, as we're seeing now, and some of the words that have been used by the Vice President J.D. Vance, we might just decide to walk away. I mean, do you think that's a real risk?
I think a real possibility that the administration says, look, if they feel as though they're not getting anywhere, if you will, with these discussions, at least in their view, from their perspective, that they're not seeing the results that they need to see in terms of getting this to come to an end, then they may say, look, we're going to pull up the stakes here a bit and not do necessarily the funding that they've been doing at the level over the past 3 years as a country, as the United States. I mean, at the end of the day, the United States has been spending billions of dollars on this conflict over roughly a 3-year period. This administration has been clear they want to see this war be resolved, come to an end. And if they feel as though it's not happening in a direction that they see fit to truly get this to come to an end, then I think you can expect, to answer your question, the administration may very well say, we're going to pause on funding or reduce funding, and it may operate on the margins and be of help where the United States can over the next few months here in terms of ending this conflict. But look, the administration has been clear about where they stand on these negotiations. They're clear where they stood on the minerals agreement, or that economic agreement, if you will. It sounds like that's still on the table here, still part of these discussions. So there's certain things that this administration has been crystal clear about in terms of what they felt was needed and is needed to get this war to come to an end. It's a question right now of how is that going to be resolved. Will Ukraine and Russia be countries, I should say, that'll work together here, come to the negotiating table and get this done?
I mean, it sounds like a lot of the impatience is directed at Ukraine. And, the Ukrainians, it can be argued, have done what was asked of them, like agreeing to a ceasefire, which the Russians didn't agree to. They want to come to the negotiating table. Why isn't more impatience directed at the Russians?
Well, look, I'll let the administration speak for themselves. I think they feel as though that they've been doing what's needed to make sure that Russia is not just brought to the table here, but also, to your point, setting the tone here that is appropriate and calling out Russia where needed, of course, in terms of the horrific acts that they've done throughout this war. There's no question that what Russia has done here is unacceptable in this conflict, in this war. No question about that at all. But ultimately, this, I think, in the eyes of the administration, is getting the war to simply come to an end. And obviously, it's not a simple thing to do here. No question about that either. But at the end of the day, it comes down to negotiation. It's not going to be a military end of this war. You've had a situation here where you've had almost a war that has not seen any movement over the past 3 years or so in terms of coming to an end. It's been kind of stalled out, if you will, in terms of ending it. And so I think right now, President Trump and his team feel as though they've done everything they can in the roughly 80 days or so that President Trump's been in office to get this thing to come to an end. Ultimately, I thought, though, it comes down to a series of things. It's going to be land, of course. I think this will be discussed here. You're seeing other things in terms of nuclear power plant. You're seeing access to a key river. You're seeing all sorts of things are being discussed here between Ukraine and Russia, and this shell diplomacy has been underway. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, that economic agreement, the minerals agreement, obviously appears to be on the table here as well. So I think we just have to see how that all shakes out here. I expect we'll know in the next few days, of course, and see what happens here.
The Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine is quoted as saying, Ukraine is ready to negotiate, but not to surrender. I mean, it sounds like the Ukrainians are saying, if all you're going to do is capitulate to all of Russia's demands and get no concessions in return, well, we can quite simply surrender on our own. I mean, what's the point of surrendering on behalf of another country? That seems to be the essence of what they're saying. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think Ukraine leadership's going to make their own choice here, their own decision on what they see as fit. I can just tell you that I think President Trump's going to make his decisions here as well and say, look, if President Trump feels as though there's not the necessary momentum, the necessary action being taken in his view, President Trump's view, to get this war to end, then I think you can expect that President Trump may very well say, you know what, the United States is going to, if you will, pull up the stakes, reduce the funding that we as a nation, the billions of dollars that we as a nation have been funding towards this conflict, and may act on the margins here or there in terms of this conflict going forward, but are not going to have as Secretary Rubio alluded to, along the lines of not having the same involvement the United States has had in this conflict, and not just in terms of aid and support through the funding, the billions of dollars of funding, but also right now, the day in and day out, if you will, diplomacy that the United States has been deploying here. This administration feels they've been doing everything they can to deploy diplomacy in this critical sense, and in terms of getting this war to come to an end, but also recognize there's a lot of conflicts around the world right now. There's a lot going on, both domestically and internationally, as it relates to the United States. And it comes down to whether or not President Trump feels as though progress will be made. That's the punchline here. If President Trump feels as though progress is being made, I think you can expect him to see this through and expect the administration to continue down the course if they see fit to get this to come to an end. I think President Trump and the administration feels as though progress isn't being made, and the elements and the variables that they see are necessary to get this war to come to an end. Then you may see a different course here from this administration, particularly as it relates to funding and the United States' involvement in this conflict going forward here. I think to wait and see what the administration will do on all that.
I mean, pulling the plug and doing some of the things you mentioned, cutting funding to Ukraine would essentially be handing victory to Russia. Do you think that's going to be a cause for concern for a lot of people in Washington? Well,
I think everyone's concerned about the direction here. I mean, look, people want to see around the world, not just the United States, around the world, want to see this war end. And I think the reality, and not to be repetitive on this point, is there's really only one way that I think the Trump administration sees this war coming to an end, and that is through this negotiation. It is through the variables that they've been putting forward, such as that mineral agreement, commercial economic agreement, other variables that they put forward here in terms of getting this war to conclude. And it's not going to be through military course. And going down the same path we've been going down is not going to be the solution. I think this administration has been clear since day one of President Trump being sworn back into office for his second term as president, that the course that we've been going down as a country for roughly 3 years now, in terms of this conflict, it's not resolving it. You're having a situation here where it's just a never-ending war, it seems. And I think President Trump and his team feel as though they have a solution here, or the best approach at least, to hopefully get this war to finally conclude. And so, to your point, to your question, look, it's going to be up to the individual leadership to make their choices and decisions on this. I will just tell you, obviously, we have to wait and see what President Trump does, but I will also tell you that if President Trump doesn't see the necessary course taking shape here and the necessary results taking shape, then yes, I think you can expect there's the potential for a different course of action on U.S. funding, U.S. involvement, and other elements here going forward here. But again, let's see what happens over the next couple of days here. I don't think it's going to be weeks or months that we'll have that figured out. I think people can expect over the next couple of days, maybe we'll see some developments here.
And what could happen in the next few days from now? Obviously, one twist of fate is that both President Zelensky and President Trump will be at the Vatican on Saturday. I mean, do you think there's perhaps some scope for the two men to sit down and thrash something out?
Yeah, let's see what happens on that front. But, look, there's a possibility that there's an agreement signed and you're pushing forward here with further diplomacy. Could be that doesn't happen. It could be that you continue to have a situation here where, for example, Ukraine and Russia leadership simply do not get to a point where there's agreement here. I mean, it comes down to both sides are going to be at the negotiating table, or I should say need to be at the negotiating table in order for this to work. This is not something where it can just simply work for Russia and expect that to be an appropriate measure. It needs to work for Ukraine, of course, as well. And Ukraine leadership needs to feel good about the deal, or if you will, the resolution here. That is important. But ultimately, where President Trump is at here is he feels as though, I suspect, that he's doing everything that he can, and his foreign policy team are doing everything that they can to get this war to come to an end. Ultimately, it comes down to these conversations with leadership, and that's going to be the big element here.
Just lastly, I mean, knowing Marco Rubio as you do, is he a patient man?
Yeah, I think, look, absolutely, Secretary Rubio is patient, but he's also somebody, I think, who has a very good pulse on international affairs. He's had that since he's been a United States senator, dealing with international issues day in and day out when he was a senator. Now, as Secretary of State, he's obviously in the room. He's a part of these discussions. And to that point, you have to trust the people who are in the room. They're going to have all the information, or most of the information, more so, frankly, than at times the general public will, or members of the media will. So I think it's important to recognize that Secretary Rubio, other members of President Trump's foreign policy team, as well as President Trump himself, they have the most intelligence on this. They have the most understanding and context to what's truly happening in these situations. And so I think where American people are at is having confidence in Secretary Rubio, having confidence in President Trump and his entire team, and recognizing that they voted for someone in President Trump who said he's going to bring this war to an end. Right now, I think this administration is trying to do exactly that. And more importantly, President Trump was crystal clear that he always felt that this would have to happen in a negotiated way, that a military solution, boots on the ground, if you will, particularly from the United States, was not going to be the solution, and continue the course that we've been on for roughly the past 3 years is not the solution as well. That will not end this war. What will, in the eyes of this administration, is negotiation. Let's see what happens here.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. Matt Terrill, former Chief of Staff for Marco Rubio. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Robert Fox, the defence correspondent for the London Evening Standard newspaper. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya News, Mr. Fox. We've heard from the US Vice President J.D. Vance. Another of these US ultimatums: either take what we're proposing or we're going to walk away from the deal. I mean, it really sounds, doesn't it, like the US is losing patience?
Yes, but I think it betrays something else. I think it's what has long been suspected of Trump and Vance, that they don't really have a strategy. And a strategy is where you have to have a long-range plan with an objective, and what you do for alternatives when, as you are prosecuting your plan, things go wrong or things go off the rails. I think we're being a bit too polite in according this some thing of America being impatient because they thought something through. The thing that is so striking about the 7 points raised so far for a peace plan for Ukraine, it gives Russia so much of the talking points that they demanded initially. By the way, they demanded a lot more and will want a lot more. And I think that Vance and Trump are trying to say, because Zelensky objects to really some substantial pieces, namely surrendering sovereignty over areas of what was regarded as Ukraine up until 2014, like Crimea, is a deal or bust, and you walk away. Actually, what they haven't calculated is by walking away, America even weakens itself.
The other thing the US appears to have walked away from is this gathering of Kyiv's allies in London, where you are, a last-minute withdrawal from those talks by the US Secretary of State Mark Rubio. What do you read into that?
Oh, come on! This is college pantomime. This is very much the kind of thing that we saw with this very crudely staged shaming of Zelensky in the Oval Office. This is a piece of theatre which they set up. If they had no intention of attending, they should have let the hosts, namely the British Foreign Secretary Lammy and his French counterpart, that he should have let them know way ahead instead of getting people to London and then doing this. This is playpen tactics. It's not grand strategy.
I mean, it sounds like the Europeans have got some red lines that they're, not going to deviate from. Perhaps that's something that's taken the Americans by surprise. I mean, what we're hearing from the Europeans is that there'll be no discussions with regards to territorial issues, for example, until there's a ceasefire. I mean, it sounds like there's a bit of a misalignment between the US and the rest of the collective West, doesn't there?
Well, it's part of the posture of advanced narcissism that you get from Trump himself. Is that anybody who doesn't agree with me is an enemy and has got it in for me, and it's time for it's time for payback. By the way, the situation that you've outlined puts Britain in an acute position, because Britain is one of the three guarantors of the sovereignty of Ukraine, acknowledged in the so-called, or the known, Budapest Accords of 1994, whereby Ukraine gave up its very large arsenal of nuclear weapons, not that they could have done much with them, in return for a solid guarantee of sovereignty by Russia, America, and Britain. Britain was the third international party to this, and it seems quietly intent on sticking by that, because the aim of Russia, at least in the sort of Trump-Putin pact, which we now have in the offing, is to write down Ukraine as an independent sovereign nation. They're bringing all kinds of excuses, which is probably extremely familiar to you and most of the audience. Didn't Budapest agree also that NATO wouldn't expand eastward? And look what it's done, that it's accrued nations like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, the three Baltics, and now Finland, but most lately. This is against the whole thing of Budapest. There was no agreement on that line whatsoever. There may have been discussion, but it was not in the formal minutes agreed from that, as far as I can discern. So what we're looking at now is is a multi-track operation with Zelensky with a very low hand, but playing very skillfully to keep the talks going, because he's got to bind in America with Europe. What I think, as of where we are talking now, we must fearful for, there is a private Goodfellas buddy-buddy pact in the offing between Trump and Putin. Putin, after all, is now seeing Witkoff, the chosen emissary, no diplomatic history, no diplomatic background, only credential, fellow developer and golfing buddy of the American president. He is seeing him for the fourth time. So not for the first time, but serious analysts of this part of the world have been putting it to me: what is the deal between Putin and Trump, and what favors is Putin now calling in?
Yeah, it's extraordinary, because Steve Witkoff, as you just mentioned there, holding these talks in Russia, saying, most recently he's quoted as saying, concessions will need to be made, concessions from Russia. But I mean, so far, I haven't really been able to identify one single Russian concession, and there are quite a few concessions that have been made on Ukraine's behalf, aren't there?
What is striking is how much the Witkoff discourse, as indeed it has been from Waltz, and now Marco Rubio has quite clearly decided to throw in his political lot, his personal ambition, politically speaking, with Trump, is how much all four of those are talking to the talking points laid down by Moscow, by Putin's Kremlin. And I think that Putin is playing them. What he seems to be angling for is some kind of concession, some kind of pause, because as we know, the fighting on the ground, at least as far as Russia is concerned, is not going at all well. So it gives him pause. But I think that this is where we must really be very clear-eyed about it, because Putin himself is caught in his own trap. His own trap is this: he cannot declare peace. He cannot fold tents and go home now, because that will weaken him at home. He is in a very difficult position. He wants to get respite on the front, but what he also wants, and it's absolutely clear in the 7 talking points that the so-called Trump plan for peace, is he wants to get sanctions lifted. He wants to get the gas sales, particularly big gas and oil, going west instead of almost exclusively going east and south. Oil is through various channels to India and being resold at great profit on refinement, and this is also throwing the supply line further east to China. It throws Putin's Kremlin on the good charity of China. China, we hear very little from about this, but it is absolutely the critical player and seems to have almost a stronger hand than America in this.
So what might we see then from the Chinese moving forward? I mean, they've talked about wanting peace, and then we've had reports that there are Chinese soldiers fighting on Russia's side. I mean, there is a role for China here, surely, if no one else is able to strike a deal.
Sorry to cut you off there, but I think that what the Chinese military personnel were doing, they were scoping. That was deep recon. They were just looking at what goes off there, what might happen were China to get into a hot war over Taiwan, what the options are, because Xi is cleaving to an ancient principle, and I mean ancient, going back almost millennia, but certainly in the last successful Chinese imperial period, where the motto was wealth at home, create wealth at home, and have a strong defense and have a strong army. What Xi is working out is how he can have China at the center of a viable global trading system without America. He needs time to build that, and he needs to generate trust, particularly in his own region, and that is what he seems to be singularly failing to do. I'm sorry to go off on China about this, but what China has to do now is so critical to the outcome of what goes off in the next few stages in Eastern Europe, namely on the marches of Ukraine, Poland, the old Lithuanian Duchy, right through to Moldova and even the Caucasus. The problem is that it is not as solid as it might appear. I'm wondering whether seriously, in the military terminology, Russia just can't afford to go firm on lines. In other words, to stop where it is. Because if you've got about 640,000 military personnel committed to a theater of operations, you've got to make damn sure your logistics work. And that is what seems to be failing. You have to feed, give ammunition, fuel, and rotate, which they haven't been able to do, those forces. And that makes them vulnerable. And that's where the longer that Ukraine goes on with these strikes, the big arsenal explosion only 2 days ago, not far away from Moscow, it's really looking very, very difficult indeed. But to come back to something that you raised, which I think is now crucial as of today, as of what America has done to their allies in London, is that the split, and it is a split, between European allies and America is now becoming quite conspicuous. It's quite obvious. And it's going to be interesting to see whether they can mend it at the big NATO summit, 24th, 25th of June in The Hague, because if they can't, then there's all to play with. Now, Can Putin exploit that to his advantage? Not clear, because I think, as we say here, that Europe is beginning to get its dander up. It's not going to give up or give in on Ukraine.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, if Russia's goal was to prize the collective West apart, one might argue that they're succeeding in achieving that goal. Just looking forwards, Mr. Fox, just because we're out of time now. I mean, in terms of what happens next, obviously the London talks downgraded. There is this opportunity that's just presented itself in Rome at the Vatican on Saturday, because of course President Trump and President Zelensky will both be there, as will a great number of other world leaders. Could that represent, do you think, some glimmer of hope in terms of discussion face to face and some sensible decisions taken around the table collectively? What do you think?
There'll be a lot of conversations. And there'll be a lot of speculation about what Zelensky will say to Trump and what Macron will say to to Prince William or whatever, or Sir Keir Starmer. I doubt it, because there was always the great maxim about that one of the Israeli foreign ministers always used to use about the Palestinians. The Palestinians never managed to take an opportunity to lose an opportunity. And I think that that's what we see with Trump. Trump, too, oddly, is much more clumsy than he was in his first presidency, because he no sooner finds an opportunity than he closes it, as we have heard today with this very thumping, rather graceless, typically graceless pronouncement from J.D. Vance. If you don't do it our way, we'll walk away. Stump, stump. You know, let's throw all the teddies and the bricks and the toys out of the playpen.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure talking to you. Robert Fox, defence correspondent for the London Evening Standard. Thank you for your time. That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then.